Welcome back. This is the second of my two-part video series where I look at the cost of starting a drone business. This week, I'll assign dollars to the categories and items we talked about last week and see if we can't come up with a final cost. Now remember, these costs are where I live in Florida. Your costs may be different, and they are annualized. So stay tuned, and I'll give you my thought. One thing I mentioned last week was when you're setting up your drone business, it really depends on whether you're going to do it part-time or full-time. If you're going to do it as a side hustle, then I have to assume that your monthly expenses are already covered, and you can take these numbers and add them on to what you're already budgeting. But if you're going into it full-time, I strongly recommend you have at least 6 months of reserves. That can be cash reserves, borrowing from your 401k, borrowing from family, whatever the case may be, but make sure you've got at least 6 months to cover your expenses. Now to the line items. I'll talk about each one and give you my idea whether I think it's mandatory or optional. And don't worry, I'll summarize at the end. So the first one, we talked about corporate structure. Again, I'm not a tax accountant. I'm not a CPA. You may want to get input from one of your professionals. But if you decide to go with an LLC, it costs $125 to register the LLC and about $140 a year to do your annual report. Now, what about your tax ID? Government wants to track you, right? Well, the good news is the tax ID costs you $0, but you do have to file the paperwork with the IRS. We talked about bank account. You're going to have a bank account to run your business. And most most banks seem to run around $200 a year on their monthly fees. But that could vary if you've got a credit union or some other vehicle. And what about accounting costs? Mentioned that earlier. This is pretty simple starting off. If you can make a spreadsheet, list all your income, list all your expenses, and keep files on that, that's probably the most you'll need, at least for your first year in business. But make sure you keep those records for tax time. Along the lines of taxes, remember your quarterly tax payments. When you're self-employed, running your own business, you do have to file those every quarter. So calculate what you need depending on your tax bracket and send that money in quarterly. If you don't, or if you underpay, the government will penalize you for that. Now, in my mind, liability insurance is mandatory, and you can get that for around $500 a year. But what about hull insurance? In other words, insurance to protect your drone. Well, if you buy a new drone from DJI, they do offer a policy at point of sale that helps you with that. But if you try to get third-party insurance, it's really cost prohibitive. Now, one thing you may not have thought about is auto insurance. And that's kind of a gray line there. If you're using your personal auto for business, you run the risk of needing commercial auto insurance. A personal policy typically will cover you driving to and from work or to and from a job site. But when you start using it for business, carrying equipment, you really need to cover that with your auto insurance carrier. And that could get expensive. If you live in Florida, that could add another $500 to $1,000 a year onto your policy. How about your homeowner's insurance? Got all this great new equipment. You want to cover it against theft and fire and all that. Probably $300 range is good for that, and that will cover you with a good homeowner's policy. We mentioned business line. Surely you don't want to use your cell phone as your business line and answer it hello, right? So if you establish a separate business line, there are a number of VoIP providers out there, VoIP being voice over IP. These are basically virtual lines assigned to you. You can have those forwarded to your cell phone, have a different ringtone assigned to them, and answer them just like your business line. And that's what I do, and that works pretty well. And that's going to run you about $500 a year. You may want to have a professional greeting on your business line, and these services also offer that, generally for around $100. Now, moving on to your website, I gave you 3 options for that. You could choose to get a separate hosting site. They provide you with WordPress. You put your WordPress site together, and then you add whatever plugins you need for e-commerce and so on, and that can run you $300 or so. Or you can go with somebody like Wix or Squarespace and pay $500 a year on that. Or there's always the custom route, but the custom route's going to cost you at least $3,000. So let's say for website, domain, and all that, around $500 a year. Don't forget your Part 107. That usually runs about $160, but I have heard of places that offer it for around $100. So check around on that. Marketing. How are we going to handle our marketing? Overall, let's say budget about $425. I know we're in a digital age, but people still like hard copies of things. So maybe $300 on brochures, maybe $125 on business cards, maybe some design costs in there. I think that would bring good value to you also. Now, how are you going to let people know what's going on? Email's still a good service, but you don't want to do it individually. And get an email marketing service like MailChimp or something like that. The great thing is they have free plans. Now, they are watermarked with their logo on it, but that's okay. That's a good way to start. And later on, you could pay for one of their non-branded services. You want to show off your work? How about a YouTube channel? Good news is that's $0. Of course, you got to pay to put stuff together, but at least the service itself is $0. Instagram, same thing. No charge to set up your account on that one. Then there's logo wear, shirts and hats and so on. Budget maybe $200 on that just to get you started. Now the big ticket item, equipment. We need drones and associated equipment, right? If we look at the drones for, $2,000 to start with, a carrying case for $250, backup batteries maybe $500, spare props for $50, miscellaneous items, you're looking at maybe $3,000 on that. So budget around $3,000 for that. And in my next video, I'm going to do analysis of all the drones that are out there and see if I can't give you some recommendations on what might be good for you depending on your type of business. So stay tuned for that one. Miscellaneous things like ND filters, landing pads, we're still looking around $3,000 total for all of that. Now, hopefully you've already got a tablet or a phone to operate your drone, but if you don't, you may have to budget around $500 for something for that. And of course, that's mandatory also. And of course, you need a computer that needs to be capable of editing these photos and videos you take. I mentioned that you may need a regular ground-based camera in addition to your drone, and you probably want to budget somewhere in the $1,200 range for that. And that's another important piece to have. Doesn't have to be new. You could buy it used off of eBay. And look at some of these sites like B&H Photo. They have used and returned items that are awfully pretty good at a discounted price. Software. Like I told you, once you define your niche, you need to be able to edit these photos and these videos. So do you have to pay for that? There's a lot of really good software out there that's going to cost you a lot of money. But to start off, there's enough stuff out there that's free, like DaVinci Resolve for video, GIMP for photos, that you can use to get started. While they may not be the best, it certainly saves you a lot of money. Of course, if you're into mapping and inspection services like that, that will require additional software, which could be as much as $300 a month. What about training? Are you the kind of person that can study on your own to pass the Part 107, to learn your camera, to learn editing software, to learn mapping and so on? Or do you need to go somebody for that training? So that's your call. That's not a mandatory item, but if you plan on it, you probably need to budget about $2,000. So there you have it. What's the total cost? Well, I estimate the mandatory items are around $11,500, and the optional ones around $3,000. Total it up, for less than $15,000, you could do it all. And I say that kind of in a cavalier attitude, but that's a lot of money, isn't it? Now, a lot of these things, if you've already got them in-house, back them off of that, and you have a much lower number. And of course, I've made a lot of assumptions here. Your situation could be entirely different, and your cost could vary. But I hope this gives you a good starting point on putting your budget together. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something from it. Hope it will be beneficial to you, and it can get you started on your way to starting your drone business. If you did enjoy it, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe down below, and if you feel like it, please share it with your friends. That would be greatly appreciated. And as always, if you've got a drone video you'd like to share with the world, send it to me. I'd be happy to include it in a future video. And as always, thank you so much for watching.